My work requires that I often go on business trips. I like the job. I like meeting new people. I like visiting new cities. But for this story, that's neither here nor there. I'd just arrived in Chicago and settled down in a place that you could probably call high class. I'd personally never shell out the exorbitant funds required for these sorts of things. But if the company's paying, then I won't complain. One night I'd come back, drunk as hell after a night out with clients. At some point during the AM hours, I went into the bathroom and slipped on some water, falling into the wall space between the toilet and the shower. I stuck out my arm, but it actually went straight through. I wasn't sure why such a fancy place used such fragile materials for their rooms, but this oddity really didn't seem right. The fall wasn't that hard. I couldn't understand how it broke so easily. I stepped back, staring at the gaping, newly formed hole. Now, I wasn't exactly sure how hotels were designed in relation to how much space there is between the rooms, but I was under the assumption that they were built side by side. If that was the case, then there must have now been a hole in my neighbor's closet or something, which was rather concerning. It was late as hell, so I decided to wait until the morning to tell them about it, so they didn't freak out and think I was some weird asshole making holes in the walls. Till morning comes and I knock on their door. They open up and are mostly understanding about what had happened. They take around each of their rooms, but there's no hole anywhere. All right, I thought to myself. Don't have to worry about anything there, but I still had to tell the front desk or something. I wasn't really prepared to pay for the damages though. Stop being so fucking cheap with your building, you know? However, I decided to put it off until after all my work was done. I come back the following night and take a look at the hole again. It really was big. Out of curiosity, I took my phone flashlight and shined it through. If this didn't lead to a room, then what was it? Just random space in between. The first thing that I saw was an old-looking notebook lying around. Interesting. I reached in and picked it up, wiping a thin layer of dust off of it. It wasn't really distinctive looking, just a plain red notebook you could probably buy anywhere, but it was the contents inside that were disconcerting. It was just pages and pages of messily scribbled nonsense. At least, that's what I thought it was at first. There was definitely a pattern in the haphazard symbols on the pages. Another language? Maybe? I didn't know. Occasionally, there would also be diagrams. These were easier to understand, but still rather cryptic. They looked like detailed outlines of a building. After a few seconds of looking it through, I came to the definitive conclusion that it was the hotel. What caught my eye was the 15th floor, which was labeled more clearly than the others. There was what looked like a staircase descending down from one of the rooms, cutting through the floor below. It didn't really show or describe where it was supposed to lead. The only word at the end of the staircase was Zone Key Kex 9. Now, I'm not sure how many nope situations you've been in, but this probably fit the bill. Despite that, I kept looking through the hole, just in case there was anything else. And there certainly was. With dead candles scattered all around it, there appeared to be a trap door. My blood kind of froze there. Was I supposed to deduce that it led to a fucking staircase on the 15th floor? Eventually, I kind of just forced myself to laugh at it. I mean, there was no way, right? I made a decision right then and there. I started tearing down the wall some more, just so that I had enough space to crawl through into the hidden room. It really wasn't bigger than a walk-in closet. Unfurnished wooden floors, walls, and ceilings with that weird trap door in the middle. I took a moment of hesitation before opening it. I mean, if there was actually a staircase, there was no chance in hell I was going down there. I reached down and grabbed the metal handle. I searched around for a lock, but it wasn't there. I finally lifted it up, not really knowing what to expect. There was only blackness at first, and then I shined my light down. Stairs. Inexplicably, there were stairs. It shocked me so much that I instinctively closed it. I sat there for a moment, astounded. I started believing that it was just some weird illusion. With that in mind, I opened it up again and carefully stuck my hand down. Not a solid surface. They really were stairs. I spent the next few hours trying to figure out what could have been underneath my room. I asked around, did the research, and even went down a floor to see for myself. But everything yielded the same conclusion. It was just supposed to be another room. I knocked on the door of the person that I'd mapped out to be right below me, but nobody answered. I even did some research online. No similar experiences to mine. In this situation, I did the one thing that I thought was appropriate. I went to my co-worker, Jacob's room, and told him about it. At first, he was a bit bothered that I was knocking on his door at 1 a.m., but I knew he'd be interested in this. He was one of those brash, paranormal aficionado guys, a bit annoying at times, but I'd say that we were friendly enough. After I'd explained the situation to him, he let out a skeptical and somewhat obnoxious laugh. He still elected to come check it out. During the walk-up, I was slightly concerned that it was going to be one of those situations where it disappears or some shit, but when we got up to my bathroom, it was still there, still weird as ever. When I opened it up and revealed the stairs, I could see a look of sheer shock drawn across his face. I doubt he'd ever actually experienced anything paranormal before, despite the stories he always tells. This was uncharted territory for the both of us. We mused for a few more hours, deliberating on whether or not to go down. Well, it was actually just Jacob trying to convince me to go down with him. Simon, I remember him telling me. What a fucking story. For whatever reason, he was adamant about going through with this insane bullshit. Eventually, I agreed to go down like 10 steps and then right back up, just to see what was going on. We opened our flashlights and he went first. As soon as my body descended into whatever the hell this place was, I could feel the atmosphere shift around me. Hard to explain, but it wasn't like when your ears pop at high altitudes. It was something else. I went down the 10 steps that I'd promised before stopping and analyzing my surroundings. It wasn't like I could see much though. It was just dark. Incomprehensibly dark. I watched as Jacob went further and further down. Are you sure this is a good idea? I say to him. None of this makes any sense. He goes down probably around 8 steps further than me before turning. Dude, this is crazy, you coming? Fuck that I told him. What kind of place is this? As I say this, his expression drops. What I asked him. Do you hear that? He responds. I strained my ears, trying to figure out what he was referring to. It was faint, but there, water. I couldn't really tell if it sounded more like somebody was sloshing around ankle deep or if they were flat out swimming, but it was extremely far down, causing me to wonder how deep this place was. And then Jacob did the stupidest fucking thing anybody could have done in that scenario. He yells out, "Who's there?" And in the near utter silence of this apparently massive room, it echoes like hell. It was quiet after that. Quiet, no more movement. Whatever was down there had reacted. What happened next nearly gave me a heart attack. Heavy, wet footsteps began sprinting up the stairs. They were still faint at first, but they gained at an inhuman pace. Jacob and I followed suit, scrambling the hell back up. We stumbled back into the room, closing the door behind us. As soon as we did this, the footsteps ceased again, but we didn't have peace of mind yet. There was no lock, and the door isn't so heavy. Jacob quickly lugged the coffee table through the washroom, back to the hidden room, and then placed it upside down, over the trap door. After that, we just stood there, breathless. We glanced at each other, both of our minds probably on the same page. There were still 3 days on this trip. I didn't really get much sleep that night, even with the drawer barricading the bathroom door. I kind of wish that I'd grabbed the book back there, though. Maybe I could have analyzed it further, uncovering any possible answers. But for obvious reasons, I don't think going back down there is the best idea right now. I've never told anyone about this before. Sometimes I wonder if it was even real. What went down? I'm still coming to terms with the event, and after trawling tons of communities, this was the only one I could find with experiences that even slightly resembled mine. I hope it's okay to vent here. I mean, fuck me. Some of you lot have been through some shit that I couldn't even imagine. Maybe you'll be able to help me with mine. I hope so anyway. It started on a night shift at work. I was working as a receptionist at a well-known hotel chain. It was a great gig for people watching, but terrible for pay. Worth noting, even if that wasn't the reason I quit, the hotel was in a rough part of town. It was one that was more frequently used for business stopovers and people visiting family or friends. There were almost no tourists in the area at all, even in summer. It was a desolate, failing place that was supplemented by the income from the bar that had become a major drinking hotspot for locals. This meant there were often fights in the lobby, transient folk popping in and very aggressively asking me for a free room, and drug runners trying to rent Rosine for a few hours at a time. In short, I was no stranger to weird shit, but none of that was anything like this. It was a few minutes before the check-in cut off on an unusually quiet night, and a family walked in. They were a true nuclear dream. Mom, dad, daughter, and son all perfectly groomed and dressed as if they were heading out golfing, despite it approaching midnight. Usually the late-night check-ins were very different. I don't like to judge, but it wouldn't be a lie to say they were often drunk, drugged up, or had a notable mark where they'd removed their wedding ring, as they paid for a night with a beautiful girl. In fact, I don't think I'd ever seen a family of 4 at that sort of time. The family didn't have a single piece of luggage on them, and were all smiling vacantly. Instantly, I found something off about them, something creepy that set my teeth on edge. They made a reservation for one night under the name Marley. Only the guy spoke, and he said his name was Bob Great. I thought, there is a sense of humor. Maybe they're just a little tired. I laughed, but he didn't get the joke. It's like he had no idea why I was laughing. Who hasn't heard of Bob Marley? Especially with a name like Bob fucking Marley. The other 3 remained silent too, creating the most awkward atmosphere I'd ever worked in. Embarrassed, I completed their check-in and gave them a short spiel about hotel services, including a pool, spa, gym, and shuttle bus service to the nearby train station. Any plans while you're in the area, I asked, like I do with every guest. No plans. Bob scanned my shirt for my name tag, Kelly. As soon as he'd addressed me, he went back into static position, an inhuman smile still plastered on his face. His wife was the same, blankly looking through me as if there were something really interesting on the wall behind my head. I was starting to internally lose my shit. What really concerned me, however, were the kids. They were young, maybe 5 and 7-ish, and they hadn't moved either. They weren't running in the lobby or fighting over a toy or even pulling on their parents' clothes, asking to go to bed. They stood facing me in sweater vests, identical smiles to their parents, and their hands resting behind their backs. Creepy little fucks. I started to survey the lobby, hoping I wasn't alone with a family of complete freaks. The bar had just closed and all the regulars had cleared out. Not even a cleaner was in sight. I cleared my throat and tried to remain calm with a forced grin on my face as I handed Bob his key. You're in room 52. Through that door, and there's an elevator. You want the 3rd floor, and 52 is just past the first door on the left. Enjoy your stay. I took a deep breath and looked at my computer to try and indicate that it was time for them to head to their room. But they didn't move. The fuckers just stood there, vacant and still with those stupid fucking smiles. Would you like me to help you find it, sir? I asked. No thank you, Kelly. Could we have a drink, please? We're parched. I looked back at the empty bar, shuddered to shield the alcohol from the people that wander in during the twilight hours. There's a fridge in your room. If you head up, it's stocked with waters and soft beverages. I held my breath this time, waiting for them to turn around and head for the door, but they didn't. They kept looking back at me as I tried to plot a sneaky way to let the doormen know I was in trouble without alerting them. I'd asked about a damn panic button under the desk so many times, and the company still hadn't shelled out for one. As my heart thumped in my chest, I cursed them. After what felt like a few minutes of silent stare-out, Bob finally spoke. Only one terrifying word, mind you. No. What was I supposed to do with that? No, what did he mean, no? The bar is shut, sir. You'll need to head to your room for a drink. No. Again, except this time it came from the wife. Her voice was raspy, as if she hadn't spoken in 1,000 years, instead favoring chain smoking. Mom, I'm sorry, there is nothing I can do. I'm happy to walk you to your room, but I'll need to get the doorman to man the desk. No! This time it was the daughter. This time she wasn't smiling. How can I help you all? I muttered, fear creeping up the back of my spine. A grin started to spread back over the little girl's face, and I pushed my chair back a bit with my feet. The revolving door began to move. Kel, please tell me I'm not too late for the bar. It was the voice of a harmless nuisance. Jasper. Jasper was a local alcoholic who came to the hotel every night to escape his loveless marriage. Annoying but pleasant, and someone I didn't mind bending the rules for and making a coffee out of hours to help sober him up. Jasper, hi. I'm just with some of our guests at the moment. Take a seat and I'll be with you. I hoped with Jasper here the family might move on. I was misguided. Are you going to let him have a drink? Bob asked, seemingly closer to the desk than he had been before. No, sir, drinks are in your room, as I said before. What do you mean, no, Kel? Please. I'll be good, I promise, Jasper shouted from the background, not picking up on the subliminal distress cues I was trying to send him. I cursed him. Why did he have to be too drunk to realize that I was in trouble? The kids turned, hands now visible as they remained clasped behind their backs, and they walked towards Jasper. What are you two doing up so? No, Nuo. It all happened so fast. The kids leapt face first at Japer, and the parents stayed at the desk, staring at me and keeping me paralyzed in position with fear. Blood flew everywhere. They tore him apart with their teeth, and I screamed. I screamed so hard that George the doorman ran into the commotion and was blindsided as the two ravenous beings turned on him. Never once did they unclasp their hands. They moved in a way that defied the laws of physics themselves, ducking, with their faces as a lethal weapon like birds pecking at their prey. I tried to get a clear picture of their faces, but I couldn't move. George shot one of the kids in the ruckus, the creepy little girl. Things went silent for a moment, and the parents' attention was finally diverted away from me. In that moment, it was confirmed that they definitely weren't human, and we were fucked. It squealed and screeched on the floor as a dark liquid oozed from the wound. Things had gotten bad in the lobby before, but never that bad. I felt like I was gonna pass out. Bob walked towards George, who was frozen with shock, unclamped his interlocked finger grip from behind his back, and reached out to rip George's head off. Clean off. Off. It rolled across the lobby floor, and I started to go into a panic attack. As I hyperventilated, I watched the wife join her family around the corpse of the daughter. "We only wanted a drink," Bob said, looking at me with the same smile he'd entered the building with, and tears in his eyes for his daughter. The wife picked up Jasper and tore a hole in his torso, pulling out one of his organs. I'm guessing it was his stomach, because when she squeezed it into her son's mouth, yellowish liquid came out. "We won't be staying tonight," Bob said as he picked up the little girl and threw the key I'd handed him at me before leading his blood-soaked family out the revolving door. "It's fucked, I know." I called the police instantly. Before anyone says it, I don't know how I made it through the phone call, but I did. I sat waiting for them, clutching the sheet that Bob had signed Mr. Marley. I had that, and the exec to hold on to. They had to believe me. But the Marleys didn't show up on the Kektvav. The event did, and the police sure as fuck couldn't explain what ripped George and Jasper to shreds, or what I was taking to and handing a key to. But they had two gruesome bodies on their hands and were desperate for someone to blame. They couldn't appeal to the public. The details were too strange to be made a spectacle of, so you won't find any articles on the net. They tried to pin it on me, but the footage proved I couldn't have done it. I spent months in lengthy interviews with them trying to coerce a confession out of me. They even ran handwriting analysis on Bob's signature to prove I hadn't faked it. They told me they searched for the family I described as the Marleys. The officer even joked that Bob Marley shouldn't be a tough guy to track down. Ironic, right? And wrong. They never found anything. I knew they wouldn't. Those people weren't people. They were something else. I never went back to the hotel after that night. Who would, right? It was a memory I wanted to forget, and for a long time I came close to managing it. It's been 6 years. Every time the phone rings, a small part of me wonders if it's the police with an update, but that part gets smaller each time. I'd moved on, started a business as a yoga instructor, and tried my best to put the trauma behind me. That was up until last week, when I received a postcard at home. At the front was a photograph of a creepy fish, and at the back was familiar handwriting. Handwriting I'd spent so long looking at, just to prove what happened to me was real. "Hi, Kelly. It's been a while since we saw you. We've had another child now to replace the one we lost. She's so parched. We'll be over to get that drink you owe us in due course. See you soon. The Marleys." The Marleys. I often wondered why they didn't kill me, and I wondered even more if they'd ever come back. Now I know I was right to wonder, right to worry. Business trips are dreadfully boring, especially in my line of work. The only good thing about them: hotels. The tedium of day-to-day dealings bookended with clean towels and a mint on my pillow. If I could live in one, I surely would. There's just something in the ambiance that soothes my soul, for lack of a better phrase. At least, that's how I felt until staying at the Covenwood Inn. It seemed like any other hotel, at first. Typical floor plan, decorative arrangements, overly polite check-in clerk. It wasn't until I received my key card and ventured up to room 371 that I would notice a dissonance in the layout, something amiss that broke up the usual hotel landscape. In my room, placed deliberately on the bed, was a sheet of paper, restrictions printed on official Covenwood Inn stationery. Room 371 guidelines. 1. No television after 9:00 p.m. 2. Only accept incoming calls on the room phone. 3. Leaving your room between the hours of 10:30 2:30 p.m. and 1:30 a.m. is strictly forbidden. 4. At least 2 to an elevator at a time. Never go in alone. 5. No visitors. If there's a knock at the door, ignore it. 6. The minibar is for emergencies only. 7. The view is a lie. Don't trust it. Enjoy your stay. This was odd. I had never seen anything like it, not once, in any of the hotels I'd stayed at in the past. Perplexed, I called the front desk for answers. All rules are to be followed during your stay. The clerk stated this plainly, as if he had uttered it 1,000 times before. I don't understand. What emergency would warrant use of the minibar? Why can't I watch TV after 9? What does the view is a lie even mean? I was offered the same reply, spoken with the same tone as before, not unlike a recording. All rules are to be followed during your stay. Click. And that was that. No answers. No explanation. Assuming it was some sort of strange hotel humor I was unfamiliar with, I threw the list on the bedside table and forgot all about it until later that night. As I laid in bed, watching the 10 o'clock news, something completely out of the ordinary happened. The reporter began scratching at her face, a little at first, but then a lot. Her motions became aggressive and skin began peeling. Blood dripped from the wounds as she continued to relay her report without missing a beat. No one seemed to notice or react to her appearance. Eventually, she froze in place and stared at the camera. Then, a close-up of her face, grotesque and mangled. Her bloodied lips spread apart and offered an ominous sentiment. Don't break the rules, Jack. I jumped out of bed, left my room, and ran downstairs. My voice echoed through the lobby as I barged over to the front desk. What the hell is going on here? The receptionist didn't so much as blink at my intrusion. What can I help you with, sir? I just watched a news reporter tear apart her own face and tell me personally to follow your bizarre hotel rules. Is this some kind of sick joke? He pointed at the wall clock behind him. It's 10:18, sir. In room 371, there's no television past. I grabbed him by the collar. I don't appreciate being toyed with. Continue this jest and there will be a call made to the authorities. Mark my words. I let go of him and stormed off, his monotone voice trailing off in the distance. All rules are to be followed during your stay. I returned to my room, shut the TV off, and laid down to sleep, pissed off, but exhausted. Unfortunately for me, my slumber would be short-lived. I awoke later that night in a fit of sleep paralysis, pinned in place by my own body. At the foot of the bed was a shadowy figure whose features I couldn't quite make out in the darkness. A warmth overtook the room as it stepped over to my side. My heart began to race. Closer now, I could see it was a man, maybe in his 50s, well-dressed, gray mustache. He leaned over me and spoke with a disturbingly unnatural timbre. His voice echoed off the walls and met my ear with an inhuman cadence. It's a pleasure to meet you, Jack. Are you enjoying your stay so far? I tried to break free of my chemical restraints, but it was no use. Where are my manners? I'm Garrett Covenwood, the owner of this here hotel. I like to greet my guests whenever I can. He rested his hand on my arm. There was a stinging sensation where his skin met mine, but I could barely wince in response to the pain. Follow the rules, Jack. If you don't, you're in for a bumpy ride. All at once, the warmth dissipated, and the sound of my cell phone buzzing rendered me fully awake. I jolted to a sitting position, reclaiming my movement. The man was gone and my arm was fine. Thank God it was just a nightmare. I quickly grabbed my phone and answered. It was my boss, Coulter. Hey Jack, there's been a change of plans. Need you down in the lobby right away. But what for? I asked, somewhat groggily. No time to waste. Hurry up, click. I looked at the time. It was 12:36 a.m. I was forbidden to leave my room, according to the damned rules. I called the front desk. Listen here. I need to come down to the lobby and meet my boss. I don't care what your rules say. There better be no weirdness. You hear me? May. The sound of tapping away at a keyboard filled my ear. Sir, our records show that your boss, Coulter Brumlock, is fast asleep in his room. Confusion washed over me. In his room asleep? How would you even know that? Are you telling me there's no one in the lobby waiting for me? No, sir. It's a slow night. Just me and the fern in the corner. I hung up the phone and dialed Coulter's number. After 2 tones, he picked up. "This better be good, Jack, I was sleeping." "Coulter, you didn't just call a moment ago and ask me to meet you downstairs, did you?" He let out a groggy sigh. "Of course not. What are you talking about? Can I go back to bed now?" Another wave of confusion struck. "Sure, it was probably a wrong number or something. Sorry to wake you." Before hanging up, I asked him one last question. "Say, you didn't get a weird list of rules from the hotel, did you?" "No, now let me sleep." Click. Click. He hung up and I sat there, contemplating things. Honestly, it felt as though I was hanging onto my sanity by a single, fragile thread. I had told myself the images on the TV were the hotel's doing, but this couldn't be faked. Coulter and I had known each other for years. I knew his raspy voice anywhere better than I knew my own. That was definitely him on the other line, but at the same time, it couldn't have been. It was, by all means, a mystery. The next day of work came and went. Before long, Coulter and I met back at the hotel where we dispersed to our separate rooms. What was once the highlight of any given business trip was now tainted by uncertainty. For a good long while, I sat there in bed, still in my dress attire, perusing the list of rules on the bedside table. I couldn't make sense of them any more than when I'd arrived, but it had become abundantly apparent that something was going on, something unexplainable. Part of me hoped it was the product of a tired mind, overworked and succumbing to the side effects of exhaustion. But lies, even the ones we tell ourselves, only stretch so far. After undressing and climbing beneath the sheets for some much-needed rest, there was a knock at the door. Rule 5 came to mind. No visitors. If there's a knock at the door, ignore it. It felt silly, but I did as the rule demanded. Best to act with an air of caution, I thought. Better safe than sorry. The knocking, however, was soon followed by a voice, Coulter's voice. "Jack, are you in there? Your wife called me. Says she couldn't get through on your cell. Something happened to Leslie." My heart sank. Leslie was our daughter. I jumped out of bed, ran to the door, and opened it at once. Coulter walked in, visibly troubled. "What's going on? What happened to Leslie?" Coulter bore a look of deep concern. "Well, it's not good news." My heart was pounding. "Out with it. Already. What happened?" "This is my daughter we're talking about." He looked at me, almost teary-eyed. "Leslie's dead, Jack." Ja. All color vanished from the room. What air I had in me left my lungs in a single, labored breath as a steady stream of tears wet my face. Coulter put his hand on my shoulder. "There's more. Please, sit down." I fell to the bed, broken. "The truth is, Jack, you broke Rule 5. Now I have to hurt you." His lips stretched into a wicked grin and his body froze. He was as still as a statue. "Coulter, I don't understand." In a flash, his hands lunged and connected with my neck. With a viciously tight grip, he began squeezing the air out of my lungs. I tried to fight back, but his strength was overwhelming. I managed to get in a few jabs to his head, but it didn't seem to have any effect whatsoever. He forced me to the floor and continued to clench my throat, until finally I lost consciousness. In that moment, I truly thought I was a goner. I awoke in bed the next morning, alive and well. I quickly reached for my phone and noticed a text from Charlotte. "Just put Leslie on the bus. She misses you terribly. So do I. Please be safe. We love you." I got out of bed and raced to the bathroom mirror. My neck was void of bruising, no signs of strangulation. I called Charlotte to be doubly certain. To my relief, Leslie was indeed fine, as alive as she was the day I left. It all just felt so real. Could it really have been a dream? Frazzled, I met up with Coulter and we drove to our next meeting. I could still feel his hands wrapped around my neck. I refused to make eye contact with him the entire day, and he noticed. What could I say without sounding certifiable? "Hey, the hotel left me this weird list of rules to follow, and now I think I'm seeing things. Want to stop for coffee before you drop me off at the nearest hospital?" No, that wouldn't bode well. Mild food poisoning from the sushi at the hotel bar was a far better excuse. Only a few more days of torment, then I could leave. That's what I kept telling myself. Little did I know my next night there would be the longest one yet. I awoke at 11:22 p.m., according to the blinking display of the alarm clock on the desk across the room. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed a faint, orange light dancing on the wall, pouring in through a gap in the curtains. I pulled myself out of bed and walked over to the window to identify the source of the light. What I saw was absolutely horrifying. The hotel was ablaze, an enormous fire engulfing the ground floor. The flames grew to great heights and touched the glass in front of me before I had the nerve to turn away and make a run for it. In leaving my room, I yelled to warn the other guests. "Fire, there's a fire. We need to leave at once." No one joined me in the hall. There was no sound at all coming from within any of the other rooms on the floor. Had everyone already evacuated? Was I the only one inside? I opened the first door in reach. It was unlocked. Inside was the reporter from TV, her face still dripping red, a blood stain on the carpet below. "You should have followed the rules, Jack." I slammed the door shut and moved on. In the next room was Coulter. I watched him strangling a copy of me before his head turned and we locked eyes. He threw my lifeless body to the floor and started running to my position. I closed the door and ran to the next. This room contained yet another impossibility, the worst one yet. It was my wife and daughter standing at the door. Their eyes were vacant, drained of all human emotion. I watched, astonished, as their skin burned to a crisp before my eyes. Charlotte spoke first. "We miss you terribly, Jack." Leslie chimed in after. "When will you be home, Daddy?" I couldn't escape them. These horrors were around every corner. In a last-ditch effort to run away from my troubles, I bolted to the nearby elevator. The button was jammed, but I kept pressing it. I looked down the hall to see the reporter, Coulter, my wife and daughter all walking towards me. Come on. Work, you piece of crap, work." Finally, the button gave way and the doors opened. I hopped into the metal box and pushed the button for the first floor. The doors closed just as the ragtag team of zombies closed the gap between us. I slid to the floor, on the verge of a heart attack. The ride down offered no solace, no lull in the supernatural calamity I faced. Without warning, the elevator dropped, plunging to the depths of the hotel, far deeper than I thought possible. I gripped the railing as tight as I could as the light wavered in and out of life. In between flickers, Garrett appeared before me. "You've broken almost every rule, Jack. This is what happens. You'll destroy us all if you're not careful." He vanished. The light left with him, knowing my death was fast approaching. I closed my eyes and thought of Charlotte and Leslie. I could see them playing outside in the rain on the day I left. It was always heartbreaking to say goodbye, and this would be no different. I held on to their memory and braced for impact. As the elevator neared the end of its descent, Garrett's booming voice entered my mind and broke the trance. "Wake UP, Jack." Jared. My eyes opened and I fell back, landing on the floor. The unique abrasiveness of carpet brushed against my skin. I was no longer in the elevator. Upon taking a deep breath and gathering my wits, the familiar surroundings set in. I had inexplicably been transported back to room 371. As I looked around in disbelief, happy to be alive, I noticed the list in my hand. Rule 7 was now circled. The view is a lie. Don't trust it. It took a minute to register, but I now knew what it meant. The view through the window. There was never any fire. It was just another ploy to get me to leave the room, and I foolishly took the bait. My eyes darted to the alarm clock on the desk. It was 1:47 a.m., meaning it was now safe to leave. I needed to get the hell out of there, and fast. I stood up, marched to the door, and grabbed the knob. It was hot to the touch, burning hot. I pulled my hand back instinctively to avoid the harsh heat. I then noticed the charred wood on the bottom of the door's frame, indicating fire, real fire. But how? I thought the view had deceived me. I looked back to the list for answers and noticed a postscript, scribbled in pen. "You should have followed the rules. Jack, you did this. Now we all have to suffer." My eyes scanned the page for more clues, to no avail. They kept landing on Rule 7. In addition to being circled, it was underlined with a striking red ink. Why did my attention need to be drawn there? Was it just gloating or something more? That's when it hit me. I walked over to the window and peered outside. The fire raged on outside my room, but the world below seemed unaffected. No flames, no firefighters, no one running out of the hotel. Just a plain parking lot, traffic on the main road, and trees in the distance. As normal a view as one could hope to expect from this particular vantage point, but the view was a lie. I tried opening the window, but an unseen force closed it shut on my fingers. I screamed and pulled them back. In a great deal of agony, I lifted the chair at the desk and threw it against the glass. It shattered, revealing the world outside for what it really was. I saw the fiery wall below and heard the guests screaming in peril. There was indeed a fire, and I truly was in danger. Still in pain, I picked up the list and looked at Rule 6. The mini bar is for emergencies only. This was certainly an emergency. Without any time to waste, I opened up the mini bar next to the desk. Inside were no drinks or food, only a small black box with a red button affixed to its surface. I pulled it out and placed it on the bed. There was now smoke seeping into the room through the outline of the doorway. Looking over the list again, there were no further instructions, nothing at all pertaining to the box. There was only one course of action left to take. I closed my eyes and pressed the button as hard as I could, putting my life in its hands. Memories played in my mind like a film reel running in reverse. The day's events followed by the previous, and so on. I relived all of the fear and torment in a matter of seconds, until eventually my eyes opened, and I found myself in line with Coulter at the front desk, waiting to check in. This place isn't too shabby, Jack, better than the last one at least. I can't explain how, but I was back in the hotel lobby on the first day of the business trip, the day we checked in. Say, Jack, what happened to your hands? I looked down and saw the bruises left by the window. Oh, it's nothing. Slammed them in the car door. That's all. That's all, both of them. He was cut off by the check-in clerk, greeting me. I was now at the front of the line. Do you have a reservation, sir? I stared at him for a while, remembering everything that had happened. I then backed away from the counter and turned to leave. Jack, where are you going? Sorry, Coulter. I think I'm going to get an Airbnb instead. I'll see you tomorrow. He waved his arms at me, frustrated, and then turned back to book his room. I heard the clerk handing him his key card before I reached the exit. Here you are, sir, room 371 on the second floor. We hope you enjoy your stay. I just got back from going on my dream vacation to Japan for the most part. It was awesome and everything went off without a hitch. My flights were on time. The language barrier wasn't too bad. It was fairly easy getting around. I got to see most of the stuff on my itinerary. The food was delicious. There was only one sore spot that really stands out, and that's the night I stayed at a capsule hotel. I was supposed to stay there 3 nights, but after the first shit, I ended up using my emergency funds to pay for a hotel the next 2 nights. I think you'll understand why after you read this. I want to start off by stressing just how damn exhausted I was. This was at the tail end of a 2-week trip where I hadn't taken a single day off, so to speak. We're talking 8 to 10 hours of walking every day, exploring the cities, going to shrines, shopping, and all that other good stuff. I'd started the day bright and early in Osaka, soaking up every bit of the city I could, knowing it might be the last time I got to see it. I took an evening train to Tokyo, which took about 3.5 hours. From there, I headed to Akihabara and explored, dragging my luggage behind me. I could have left it in a locker at the train station, but that meant doubling back and grabbing it, and I didn't want to subject my feet to that. I'd decided on a chill evening. I ended up being so enthralled that I didn't get to the capsule hotel until a bit past midnight. So yeah, I felt like I could have slept through a hurricane. I checked in, got a neat little bracelet with my capsule number, as well as a key to a small locker for my stuff. I somehow managed to wedge my oversized luggage in there. I took a shower and then headed to my capsule for sweet sleep. If you've never heard of capsule hotels, just imagine a morgue, except instead of a wall of tiny human freezers, it's full of neat, slightly larger sleeping areas tall enough to sit up and use a laptop, and long enough to sleep in. As I crawled into capsule 616, I noticed a little light indicator come on outside the capsule to indicate it was occupied. Sweet, I pulled the door down, played with every single knob on the wall just because I could, and once I figured out how to turn the lights off, my head hit the pillow, and it was off to dreamland for about 10 minutes. It wasn't long before I started hearing a voice through the walls. I guess they were thinner than they looked, and that my sleep hadn't plunged into deep enough territory for me to stay unconscious despite the mental and physical exhaustion. I tried to fall back asleep, but the voice kept me up. It was constant, and I mean seriously nonstop. I don't think she ever took the time to breathe. Imagine that one Eminem song, you know the one, right? It was like that. Except it went on for easily half an hour. Because the sound was muffled and because every syllable melded into the next, I couldn't make out what language she was speaking. I don't think it was Japanese. I don't know, I'm not a linguistic expert, but there weren't a lot of that I sound you hear so often in Japanese. And she was hitting those R's pretty hard, so if I had to guess, I think it might have been German. Whatever language it was freaking me out. That's when I remembered the buttons on the wall. I pawed around until I turned the lights on, and then found the knob for the white noise. Bless you, Japan, for your practical technology. My little capsule was soon filled with the sound of rain and thunder easily overpowering the voice from my neighbor's capsule. I could still hear her, sure, but she was a whisper in a typhoon. I dimmed the lights, closed my eyes, all was right with the world ... for, you guessed it, about 10 minutes. Intermixed with the synthetic storm was the wailing of a tornado siren. It took me a long time to realize it wasn't meant to be there, and that it was coming from my neighbor. At this point, it was about 2 a.m. I was tired, I was cranky. I just wanted a few hours of sleep before another fun-filled day of adventure. I was internally cursing at whatever inconsiderate fucking tourist starts screaming in their goddamn capsule in the middle of the goddamn night, knowing full well everyone could hear her. In my frustration, I made my one big mistake. I slammed my fist into the wall and screamed, "Shut the fuck up." This was her invitation to start slamming back, and boy did she take it and run with it. Screaming, she hit the wall so hard, I swear to God it felt like my entire capsule was shaking. It was like she was full on body slamming it with all her might, all while screaming so loud I could barely hear the storm anymore. I put my hand on the wall and I felt it buckle as she thrashed against it. I backed away into the opposite wall, but I could still feel every slam as though it was coming from the capsule to my left instead of my right. I'd had enough. I was going to go see if the concierge was still awake and see what they could do about putting me on another floor or kicking this jerk out. I opened my capsule door and jumped onto solid ground. The little occupied light at the foot of my capsule turned off after a few seconds. The noise stopped, the banging ceased, and my breath caught in my throat. I looked at the light indicator under my neighbor's capsule. It was turned off. I could feel cold sweat pouring out of me. Just a broken light, right? That's what I hoped ... but I guess I've read one too many horror stories, because something compelled me to grab her door handle and slowly lift it. Yeah, the neighbor's capsule was empty. I spent the night on a bench in the locker room. I know I probably should have left entirely, but I was spent. The next morning, stiff and barely rested, I went down to the lobby and tried to explain what happened in my pitiful, broken-ass Japanese. The concierge looked confused, and even after using a translation service, I didn't get anywhere until she saw my bracelet with the room number. There was the slightest micro-expression of horror on her face. She pulled my arm towards her, gently took the bracelet off, and flipped it around. I was supposed to be in capsule 919, not 616. That look on her face, though, I can still picture it in my mind's eye. I have a feeling it wasn't just a look of, "Oh dear, you were in the wrong capsule." I think she knew damn well what was going on. So yeah, I went to a hotel the next night. I was out of work and looking for something to pay the rent until I could find a new job that was in my field. When I saw the ad, I'd been scrolling through job listings when it caught my eye. Several positions open at the Good Shade Hopen. Well, damn. That was way more than decent pay to work in a hotel. I was shocked that they'd even have open positions if they're paying that much, but it seemed to be my lucky day. I mean, sure, I lived in a huge city, but it was odd that I'd never heard of the place when it obviously was making a lot of money. I figured it must be extremely classy and high maintenance, and I was prepared to put up with some rich jerks if it meant a sweet paycheck. There was no address or phone number, just an email. I shot out a reply containing my resume and kept looking through the other offers on the site. Before I found anything else that might be worth applying for, my inbox pinged. The people at the Good Shade were quick in their response. "Dear Mr. Stevens, it has come to our attention that you would like to apply for a position at the Good Shade Hotel. Your resume has been taken into account, and we require you to answer several follow-up questions so that you may be considered for the job." Then came a series of questions. Some were normal and others were extremely odd. I thought maybe they were trying to rule out anyone who might be crazy. No one wants psychotic hotel staff after all, right? Have you had prior experience working in customer service and or hospitality? Yes, both. Prior experience in a small motel. Would you be comfortable filling out in DAF form? Yes. Would you be comfortable working in a remote location? Yes. Are you able to drive a long distance to attend work? Yes. Are you able to work night shifts? Yes. Which typeset of positions are you looking for? Any available, preferably not housekeeping, but willing if need be. Have you had any issues with mental illness? No. Do you take any medications? If yes, please list. No. Do you believe in paranormal, supernatural, extraterrestrial beings? Not really, there's no proof of them. Unsure of my beliefs in the afterlife. How many people live in your household? Only myself. What is your marital relationship status? Single, never married? Have you ever heard of our hotel? Only in the job listing I responded to. Do you contain 100% human genetics? As far as I know, yes. What caused you to apply for work here? I am unemployed, have experience in this type of work, and could honestly use the money. Please list any questions or concerns below your responses. We will respond to your application promptly. An affirmative response to your application will come with an email containing the details of your job placements and a few documents requiring signature. Thank you for applying at the Good Shade Hotel. A Smith, owner-manager. Like I said, some super odd questions. I wasn't about to turn it down though. I needed the money. I didn't think much of the odd questions anyways. The only logical explanation was that they had a bad experience with a psycho employee or two. If I was paying that much to employ someone, you're damn sure I'd want to make sure they didn't think they were E.T. I answered every question as truthfully as possible and sent the email back, confident that I'd be getting the job. My confidence was not misplaced. I received the affirmative response within the hour. I was overjoyed. This job paid so well that I'd never want to look for a different one. The new email gave me an address that I was to be at exactly 4 p.m. the next day. I would be working as a receptionist, $40 an hour to answer phones, put reservations into computers, and give out room keys. It would be simple. Maybe not the most stimulating work, but tolerable. The drive out to the address I was given was odd. I passed through a tunnel I had been through a few times before, but I could swear that I didn't recognize the area I was in after coming out of the tunnel. I pushed my confusion aside, figuring that the landscape had changed since my last time in the area. I arrived at the address after over an hour of driving. It was remote and surrounded by forest. The building itself was grand. 15 stories high, beautiful architecture. The trees surrounding the hotel were probably the tallest I'd ever seen in my life. They seemed to scrape the sky. Somehow the hotel managed to look perfectly normal amidst the beautiful natural environment that stretched far into the distance. It was the only building for miles around, and it was well hidden. It occurred to me that the guests likely paid very well for this sort of seclusion. It was deeply peaceful. When I entered the building, I found it to be dark and elegant. The place was so classy that the paycheck suddenly seemed reasonable. It wasn't the biggest hotel, but it was probably the fanciest one I'd set foot inside in my entire life. The lobby seemed cavernous, and my steps seemed to echo as I walked up to the front desk. Behind the desk stood a pretty redhead. She smiled as I came forward. "How can I help you, sir?" she asked politely in a sweet sing-song voice. I'm here for the receptionist position." I shook myself mentally. I had been staring. She giggled at my flustered state. "I'll let Mr. Smith know you've arrived." I resumed my staring as she walked away. There was something different about that girl. She returned with a tall man in tow. We shook hands and introduced ourselves, but I found myself distracted by the smiling redhead. Mr. Smith seemed to notice my waning attention. He led me behind the desk and into an office. "Quite the nuisance that Althea is," he chuckled fondly. "Althea?" I questioned. The unusual name felt odd on my tongue. Yes, I believe she is calling herself Alice now. Kind creature when she wants to be. She's here from time to time to help out. You shouldn't experience any negative side effects," he replied, seemingly lost in thought. I had no idea what he meant, but I assumed he meant the immediate attraction I felt for her. She must have a history of fellow employees lusting after her. "Ready for your entry meeting?" he asked abruptly. Apparently back on track. I nodded, and the meeting that followed left me confused and, to be entirely honest, a little freaked out. He went over the questions from my application. We discussed them in slightly more detail, and he provided more information about the job and its requirements. I had to sign a form before we even began talking about the position. Fortunately, a loophole I found in the contracts does not disallow me from posting my entire experience in a place that most of the world thinks is for fictional tales. I know that this place holds the truth. You know it too. This is the one place where I can freely talk about my experience, and I'm so thankful to be able to get it all off of my chest. Anyways, the rest of the meeting brought to light some of the reasons why I may not be allowed to speak of the job or the guests, but it initially made me wonder if perhaps my boss was insane. 100% human genetics, he questioned as he looked over my application. Very good. The guests have been missing having someone of your appeal. Then he began listing the details of the position. I would mainly be working at the front desk. There may be occasional instances when I am requested by a guest to deliver items to Bieler. They may also request to look at me for a maximum of 5 minutes with 0 physical contact. I am to avoid any physical contact, including accidentally brushing against the clients. The contract requires 3 months minimum attendance before I may opt out, and opting out comes with what he called a mandatory deconditioning. Opportunities to opt out and be debriefed are provided at 3-month intervals. Attempting to quit before one of the intervals breaks the rules of the contract. He listed off the consequences of breaking the contract at such a speed that I barely understood them, and followed up by saying, "I think you'll do wonderfully here, Mr. Stevens." I was kind of dazed from all the information, but signed the contract. My boss might be a little crazy, and the requirements might be slightly odd, but the money wasn't something I could pass up. How bad could it be? My first shift was that very evening. I'd be working the desk alongside Alice. Mr. Smith came up to the desk as I adjusted the name tag he had given me, Tyler Stephens, HS. "Alf Alice," he sighed. "Be nice to this young man. It's hard to find people like him." She pouted for a moment, then nodded. Smith shifted his gaze to me and held out his hand. It contained a small vial of milky liquid. "If you start to become delusional," a drop in each eye, he turned and walked away. I looked to Alice in confusion. "It's in your contract," she said. "That'll kill any negative side effects if you happen to touch the wrong guest or spend too much time with me." She gave a wide smile, and for a moment her teeth looked unnaturally sharp. I slipped the vial into my pocket, feeling incredibly skeptical about the entire job. It was too late to back out, though. I had already signed the contract. The beginning of the shift was slow. No guests had come to check in or out. I found myself staring at Alice again. Her name tag caught my eye. Alfea I.N. "No last name?" I asked. She glanced at her name tag. "Don't have one. At least not one that would fit or make sense on a name tag," she shrugged. "And the letters. HSIN. Homo sapien. Elesabrosa not the scientific name in your case. The shades decided mine," she said nonchalantly, typing something into the computer. "Elesabrosa nota. Shades." What I laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke on the newbie. "Charming much," she said dryly. "Their sense of humor is immaculate. It doesn't pay to be one of a kind." I stared for a moment, looking for a hint that she was joking. Her face remained completely serious. "Oh," I responded, not sure what to say. She started laughing out of nowhere, and I was relieved for a moment. "You really have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." "Ha, I'm a really overpaid receptionist, and I'm the victim of the weirdest hazing ever," I said with a nervous laugh. She giggled again. "I could tell you, but I think it'd be more fun to watch you gradually realize what you're part of." She paused, looking around the empty lobby. "I'll tell you this, though. The name has a reason. All of our guests are shades of some sort. I'm one as well. In fact, you'll probably be the only person roaming around wearing an H for the entirety of your employment." "I have no idea what a shade is," I told her. Her response was a wide smile, revealing rows of shark-like teeth. I took a step back, letting out another nervous laugh. I was afraid. "They're real. Want a touch?" she asked. The amusement on her face was plain to see. I shook my head no. Unable to respond, she shrugged and turned back to the computer. I wasn't sure what to think, but I was now wholeheartedly aware that this girl was not human. The room fell silent. I had no idea how to start a conversation after seeing that. Alice's voice broke the tension. "Sylvia should be here in exactly 2 minutes." I nodded, still not trusting myself to say something that wouldn't have me eaten by those teeth. She was right, though. I watched the clock on the far wall tick the time away. Exactly 120 ticks later, the front door opened. A girl who had to be no older than 12 entered. She was a horrifying mess. Covered in dirt and blood, her left arm was bent at an unnatural angle, and a bone was protruding grotesquely from her forearm. She dragged her right leg behind her, the ankle quite obviously broken, and a deep gash in her forehead was pouring blood. My first instinct was to scream, and my second was to run to help. Alice yelled for me to stop, but I ignored her. I ran to the young girl. "Oh my God. Are you okay? Do you need me to call you an ambulance?" What happened? The words erupted from my mouth, hardly a space for breath between them. She stared blankly into the distance, not acknowledging my panicked questions. I reached out for her and Alice yelled from near the desk, "Stop, too late." I gripped the girl's shoulders and stared at her. Her eyes were glazed over with a milky white, and she let out a piercing scream when my hands made contact. Before I could blink, she was gone. My hands were grasping at empty air. She had simply and entirely disappeared from the lobby. "You moron," Alice yelled at me again. I started at her, nowhere near understanding what had just occurred. She sighed as she saw my face. "Now she's going to loot. She'll be back in an hour." "What? You're not supposed to touch the guests," she stated, sounding annoyed. "We need to call the police." She was seriously hurt. I was freaking out. "She was seriously dead," she said dryly. "The phones here don't make calls to 911 anyways. She's a shade. Stop panicking. You'll get used to it." I couldn't think of any response to that. I still hadn't fully grasped what this job was all about. I suddenly realized that I had no feeling in my hands. I clutched them close to my chest to discover that they were cold as ice. Instantly, the feeling spread deep into my chest and up my arms. I was freezing and began shivering violently as I walked back to the desk. Alice glanced at me when I arrived beside her and let out another exasperated sigh. "Give me the vial. Tip your head back," she ordered. I pulled it out from my pocket while she took an eyedropper from a drawer in the desk. I watched as she squeezed the end of the dropper to pull liquid from the vial. The milky substance turned a pale purple as it entered the dropper. I leaned my head back and allowed her to put a drop in each of my eyes. As she tucked the vial back into my pocket and put away the dropper, I felt the cold leave my body. "When Sylvia gets back, I'll deal with her," she said calmly. "Maybe you should just watch for the first couple of days. There's a lot to learn about the different types of shades that we root." I nodded and sat patiently. I looked over the fine print in my contract while we waited. Early dismissal from any staff position will result in an extremely painful deconditioning process. It is highly recommended to wait the entire 3-month period so that we may provide a nearly painless process. Based on what I had already seen tonight, I didn't want to know what these people considered a painful process. I'd stick out the job for 3 months and quit if I couldn't handle the insanity. Soon enough, Sylvia came back. She looked exactly the same as she had an hour ago. I resisted the urge to both scream and vomit. Alice called out to her. "Hi, Sylvia, sweetie." She walked over and knelt in front of the mangled girl. "Welcome back to the good shade. I'm sorry to tell you again, but you're dead." Sylvia's head snapped toward Alice at an inhuman speed. She nodded, seeming to think for a moment. "We have room U344 available for you," Alice told her, holding out a key card. The girl nodded again, took the key, and shuffled her way towards the elevator. When the doors shut behind her, I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Alice walked back over and sat at the desk. "There's no one else scheduled for tonight. You could probably nap until the shift ends." "Yay, I might," I started. Then curiosity got the best of me. U344. "Oh, Mr. Smith forgot to tell you. Well, we have 50 floors of underground rooms," she told me. "A lot of the guests prefer it." I don't know why it surprised me. After everything else that had happened, I was sitting next to a girl with shark teeth, and we had just let a mangled corpse into the hotel. What else? I don't know how I'm going to manage the next 3 months without having nightmares, I laughed. But the statement was entirely serious. "Oh, honey," Alice giggled. "You'll see much worse, trust me." I stared at her sharp teeth and felt a chill run through me. She wasn't wrong about that.